back with another tutorial, and this time around we will be talking about ranged combat. Overall it's pretty straightforward, but I'll go through all the details to make it easy for you. Let's start by taking a look at the different weapons. The weapons available are the short bow, longbow, elven bow, crossbow pistol, crossbow, arbalest and sling. They all have different stats, but the interesting ones for today's video is the damage and the reload time needed. Then they have an availability, which is basically how rare the weapon is. They have a cost, they have a set of special rules, and they have a class. And all the ranged weapons are class 6 except crossbow pistol. And class 6 means that it's not very heavy, but you need to use both hands to use it. And then you have an encumbrance value, which is basically how much the weapon weighs. Next up is line of sight. Line of sight is measured from the center of the shooter's square to the center of the target square. If this line passes through an object or another model, the target will be harder to hit. If the line passes through a wall, that is, these black lines at the end of the tile, the shot cannot be taken. There are also some objects, like pillars, that block line of sight completely, and thus makes a shot impossible. When measuring line of sight through a door, you consider both the squares as open terrain, but you should take both the walls into consideration. That is, if the line of sight passes through the black area outside of the door, the shot cannot be taken. When shooting past an object, there is a -10 modifier to hit, and when it comes to objects, it's the actual graphics on the tile that matters. So if the actual graphics of the object doesn't interfere with the line of sight, it won't affect the shot. In this case, the fountain is in a square between the shooter and the target. However, the line of sight won't pass through the actual graphics, and therefore it won't affect the shot. In this case, however, the graphics would touch the line, and therefore there would be a -10 modifier to hit. If you have a hard time deciding whether an object would interfere with a shot or not, then simply use a die to decide. There are two special things that you need to keep track of when it comes to ranged combat. Most ranged fighters also have a close combat weapon, so you need to keep track of what weapon is equipped. For this, you can easily use this token, either ranged, or you can flip it to the melee side. Then you need to know if the weapon is loaded or not, and you can use a token for that as well. It's unloaded on one side and loaded on the other. This token is cut a bit off center, but that's fixed in the production version of the game. There is an instance where a model would block line of sight. In this case, the shooter would not be able to target the goblin. And that's because he's firing in a straight line along the squares. If he would be standing there though, he would not be firing in a straight line along the squares, and he would be able to shoot the goblin. However, with the -10 modifier, since there is a model in the way. However, if you're shooting past a friendly model, and you're rolling 90 or above, you not only miss your target, but you will also hit your friend. The actual shooting is pretty straightforward. If your weapon is loaded, you can fire it by spending 1 action point. You then need to calculate your chance of hitting. This is done by adding or subtracting any modifiers to your range skill value. In this case, the shooter would be firing through a model, which would apply a -10 modifier. And then the goblin has a -5 to hit modifier. So in total, we have a -15 modifier to the range skill value of the shooter. Let's say he has range skill 60, and that would give us a to hit chance of 45. In this case, we rolled 14, so that will be a hit. Next up, you would roll damage. This shooter is equipped with a longbow, which has a damage of a 1d10. So we would do 9 points of damage, but the goblin has 1 point of armor as well. so only 8 points would pass through. However, since the goblin only has 8 hit points, this shot would kill him. We would then flip the token to the unloaded side, and we would cross off 1 arrow from the quiver. We then have 1 action left, which could be spent loading the bow again for another shot, or we could move or do something else. Bows and slings can also be reloaded while moving. So after the shot, you could move 4 squares while reloading as well. There is also a possibility to spend 1 action point to aim, and that would give you a +10 modifier to your range skill. So in this particular case, if the shooter decides to aim, he would add +10 to his range skill, giving him 70. But we still have the -5 modifiers from the goblin, so that would give us 65% chance of hitting. Firing with an enemy is done mostly in the same way, but this time we need to consult the behavior card. If we look at the behavior card, we can see that there is a chance that the enemy will aim, and there's also a chance that the enemy will shoot. There is also a roll to make to see whether he targets the closest enemy or the enemy that is easiest to hit. Next up, we need to check the range skill of the goblin, which is 30, and we can see that he's armed with a sling that makes 1d8 points of damage. Furthermore, he does not have any special skills apart from fearing elves, which is hardly a skill, so there is no need to roll on the outer part of the table. When rolling to hit with an enemy, we also need to decide where the projectile hits. This is done by rolling a d6. So in this case I would roll all these dice together. So let's see what we've got. We've got a 4 telling us that he is not aiming, but he's actually shooting. He rolled 35, which is a miss. If he had hit, we would consult the to hit table to see where the projectile hits. In this case, I know that 1 is in the head, and it would have done 1 point of damage. Now, if this die would have been a 1 or 2, the goblin would instead have aimed, adding +10 to his next shot. Instead of re-rolling then, I would just keep this roll and add 10 to the result, as in his second action the goblin would fire. So then he would have a 40% chance of hitting, so in this case his shot would actually be a hit in the head for 1 point of damage. You then need to consult your character sheet to see what kind of armor you have that could protect your head. If the armor value would be higher than the damage, the hero would not be hurt. If the damage is higher than the armor value though, you subtract the armor value from the damage and you remove that amount of hit points from the hero. You also deduct 1 point of durability from the armor. Let's say we have this situation and it's the goblin's turn to act. In this case, the goblin won't have line of sight, so he can't fire his weapon. If we then take a look at the behavior card, you can see that the first point is that if within 2 spaces of a hero, well, we're not within 2 spaces, so we can ignore that one, reload missile weapon, well, it's already loaded, so there's no point of doing that. Move up to M spaces to get in a position that increases its odds to hit. Well, the simple one would be 1, 2, 3, and then fire in his second action. However, in this case, in his second action there is a chance that we will roll 1 or 2, meaning that the goblin would aim instead. We would then place an aim token next to him. We don't need to figure out which target he is aiming at. That doesn't matter, we don't know. Fast forward to the next turn, and it's the goblin's turn to act. There is no point of rolling on this table now because the goblin has been aiming during his last action, so this action he will fire, we know that for sure. So now it's time to decide who he will fire at. In this case, the targets are equally far away and they're equally easy to hit. So we'll let the die decide. So odd, even. He will be firing at this one. We will roll to hit. Remove the aim token, flip this one to the unloaded side, and then it's time for action number 2. And then let's check this one again. If within 2 spaces, well, he's still not within 2 spaces, reload missile weapon. Alright, so he spends his second action reloading. There are some more modifiers that I haven't mentioned, like firing at a large target or firing at a prone target, but I'll let you discover those yourself. They're easy to find on the quick reference sheet. Also worth mentioning is range. The maximum range when firing inside a dungeon is 10 squares. That is due to the darkness. The same rule applies if you're fighting outside during the night. If you're fighting outside in daytime, there are no range limitations. So, that was the rules for ranged fighting. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for the next tutorial.